Hi everybody. In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about how to organize an essay at the college level. So usually when we think about organizing an essay, we think of the 5-paragraph essay. And this is not a bad place to start. If you know how to write a 5-paragraph essay, you've already got a good start. If you're not familiar with it, I wanted to give you a quick rundown. So this may come as a shock, but a 5-paragraph essay has 5 paragraphs, right? The first is an introduction that, you guessed it, introduces your topic. And the last sentence is always a thesis statement, or basically just the point you're trying to make in your paper. The next 3 paragraphs are what we call body paragraphs, and those are all meant to support your main point with evidence, right? So a body paragraph should start with what we call a topic sentence, and then include different types of evidence. We'll go over types of appeals later in the class. But basically, you're just trying to prove your point, right? And you do that 3 different times. And then the last paragraph is a conclusion, which of course concludes your paper by looking backward at your paper and summarizing the points you've made, and then gesturing forward by giving your audience something to think about after reading your paper. Now, the way I explain the 5-paragraph essay to students is that it's like a kebab. So the introduction should be shaped sort of like a funnel that starts with general information to hook your reader in, and then generally gets more specific until it gets to your one precise point of the paper. And then that point, that thesis statement, holds your whole paper together. So everything should tie back to that point you're trying to make. Right, so each of your body paragraphs is sort of like a, piece of meat or a vegetable on your kebab that is held together by that point, right? And then your conclusion is kind of the opposite shape of an introduction. It starts really specific with a summary and then gets more general as it goes to give your reader kind of something to carry with them. So let's look at an example. This is the example I always use when I teach. Is if I were going to write a 5-paragraph essay about cats, my introduction would start by talking about pets in general, right? Just to kind of get my reader interested so that they know where the paper is going. And then I would slowly become more specific, and I would end by making the statement, cats make the best pets. That would be my thesis statement, right? And then I would get into my first body paragraph. And in your body paragraphs, you want to be really careful and make sure you're only talking about one thing at a time, right? So in my first body paragraph, I might talk about that cats are fuzzy. And this makes them great pets, right? And in that paragraph, I could include data, right? So numbers or research. I could include stories, so maybe personal narratives, or I could just include logic and logical statements about cats being fuzzy. But I only want to talk about fur in that paragraph, right? And then I would have a transition into the next body paragraph, which has a different topic, right? So I might talk about how cats are independent and they can use a litter box so you don't have to take them out all the time, right? I would want to keep that separate from talking about how they're fuzzy. Otherwise, my reader will get confused. They may be related, but they should be separate. So every time you talk about a new idea, you want to start a new paragraph, right? And then maybe my third body paragraph is about how they're just cute to look at or something. And so all 3 of those paragraphs would be separate topics with separate evidence. And then I would end with a conclusion that, as you can see, sort of sums everything up to make my point very succinctly, right? So I might say, because of the fuzziness, independence, and adorableness of cats, they make the best pets. So you can see that I restated my thesis statement and also tied in all of my points that back up that thesis statement, right? And then in my conclusion, I would want to give my audience something to think about, right? So I might say, if you think you don't like cats, you need to go pet some more, okay? So now that you have an idea of the 5-paragraph essay, what do you do with that in a paper that doesn't call for a 5-paragraph essay, right? There are a few things that you will always do in an essay at the college level, right? No matter what, you need to have a clear introduction, right? You should give your reader a sense of where the paper is going and make them want to read your paper. And then your paper should always have a point. It may not be a thesis statement with a fact that you're trying to prove per se, but there should be a reason that you're writing the paper. Okay, and then you'll always have independent body paragraphs that contribute to the point. So those should be separate ideas, but all related to the point you're trying to make. And then you'll always have a conclusion, and your conclusion should always give your reader something to think about, even if it's just asking them to think about the points you've made more, right? So there's still a lot of leeway for what you can choose to do for your essay, right? Your point doesn't have to be an argument, right? For essay 1, you're not making an argument, you're just making the point that this value is important to you, okay? You'll also have to figure out how many paragraphs. Every paper won't have 5 paragraphs, right? And I've included the equation, more or less, that I use for all my papers. As you can see, 250 words is usually about 1 double-spaced page, and it usually has about 2 paragraphs on the page. So for project 1, that's a minimum of 1,400 words, that's going to be way more than 5 paragraphs, or it should be, right? And the number of paragraphs will depend on the amount of information you include in each paragraph, right? Paragraphs generally should be between 8 to 12 sentences, but if you're telling a story and one part is really short, it may only be 5 or 6 sentences. So obviously you may need more paragraphs then, okay? You also have control over the content of each paragraph. You can choose if you want to use ethos or data, numbers, research. You can choose to use pathos or emotional appeals, that would be like stories, or you could just rely on logic and speak to the audience and their experiences, right? You get to decide what goes in your paragraphs, and obviously different assignments will require different types of evidence. And then finally, you get to decide how you frame the conclusion. You always want to give your reader something to think about, but that may look a little different for each paper, right? You could include a call to action, right? So in my cat example, I could say, I challenge you to go volunteer at an animal shelter and pet some cats, right? It could be a rhetorical question, something that just asks your audience to think a little bit about your topic. So maybe if you think cats are so bad, why are there so many of them, right? Or it could just ask your reader to think a little more. I would like you to think a little bit about how wonderful cats are. Something like that. There are a lot of different ways you can go about a conclusion, but students often struggle with the conclusion the most, and they sometimes just summarize. And I'd really like you to think about how you can end your paper on a strong note.